War of the Worlds Retelling Chapter 18. In the first book, I talked a lot about what happened to my brother instead of my own adventures. In the last two chapters, I and the curate hid in an empty house in Halliford to escape the dangerous black smoke. We stayed there for 2 days, from Sunday night until the day of the panic, unable to do anything but wait. During that time, I was very worried about my wife. I imagined her in Leatherhead, scared and in danger, already thinking I was dead. I walked around the rooms, feeling sad and crying out loud when I thought about being separated from her and all the things that could happen to her while I was gone. My cousin was brave, but he didn't always realize when he was in danger. What we needed was to be careful, not just brave. The only thing that comforted me was the thought that the Martians were moving away from my wife and towards London. All of these worries made me very tired and irritable, especially when the curate kept complaining and making noises. I got fed up with him and went to a room with globes and copybooks to be alone. When he followed me there, I locked myself in a small room on the top floor of the house to be alone with my sadness. We were stuck in one place because of the black smoke for a whole day and the morning of the next. On Sunday night, we saw some signs of people in the house next to us, a face at the window, moving lights, and a slamming door. But we didn't know who they were or what happened to them. The next day, we didn't see them at all. The black smoke kept getting closer to us, creeping towards us along the road outside the house. Around noon, we saw a Martian coming across the fields. It used a super hot steam jet to spray a material that melted everything it touched, including the walls and windows. The curate hurt his hand while running away from it. When we finally dared to look outside again, everything north of us looked like it had been covered in black snow. Looking towards the river, we saw something strange. The black of the scorched meadows mixed with a red color that we couldn't explain. At first, we didn't know how the change in the black smoke's movement would affect us. We were just relieved that we weren't trapped anymore. But then I realized that we had a chance to escape. I wanted to take action, but the curate was content to stay where we were. "We're safe here," he kept saying. I knew better now, thanks to the artilleryman's advice. I searched for food and water and found some oil and rags to treat my burns. I also grabbed a hat and a shirt from one of the bedrooms. When I told the curate I was going to leave on my own, he finally decided to come with me. It was quiet all afternoon, so we left around 5 o'clock and walked along the charred road to Sunbury. As we walked towards Sunbury, we saw dead bodies of men and horses lying on the road, along with overturned carts and luggage covered in black dust. The scene reminded me of Pompeii, a city destroyed by a volcanic eruption. We continued on to Hampton Court, where we finally found a patch of green untouched by the destruction. We passed by Bushy Park and saw deer wandering around, as well as men and women hurrying in the distance. Twickenham was the first place where we encountered people, but they didn't have any news for us. Most of them were too scared to leave their homes. We saw evidence of a hasty retreat along the road, including 3 smashed bicycles. We crossed Richmond Bridge and noticed red masses floating down the stream, but we didn't have time to investigate. We thought the worst and hurried across the bridge. On the other side, we saw more dead bodies and black dust, but still no Martians. It wasn't until we were closer to Barnes that we caught a glimpse of them. As we walked towards the river, we noticed the town of Richmond burning in the distance. We couldn't see any signs of the black smoke outside of the town. Suddenly, we saw a group of 3 people running down a side street towards the river. As we continued walking, we saw a Martian fighting machine looming over the housetops not far from us. We were scared and didn't know what to do, so we hid in a shed in a garden. The curate was crying and refused to move. However, I still wanted to reach Leatherhead, so I went out again in the twilight. I walked through a shrubbery and along a passage beside a big house and emerged on the road towards Kew. The curate stayed in the shed but eventually followed me. It was a foolish decision because we soon saw another fighting machine in the distance, chasing after a group of people. The Martian didn't use its heat ray but picked up the people one by one and put them in a metallic carrier. I realized for the first time that the Martians might have a purpose other than destroying humanity. We were petrified for a moment. Then we turned and ran through a gate into a walled garden. We fell into a fortunate ditch and lay there quietly, barely daring to whisper to each other until the stars came out. It was almost 11 o'clock before we gathered the courage to start moving again. We didn't venture out into the road anymore. Instead, we sneaked along hedgerows and through plantations, watching closely through the darkness. My friend watched on the right, and I watched on the left for any signs of the Martians who seemed to be all around us. We stumbled upon a scorched and blackened area where dead bodies of men and horses were scattered about. The men had been burned horribly about the heads and trunks, but their legs and boots were mostly intact. Behind a line of 4 ripped guns and smashed gun carriages were the bodies of dead horses about 50 feet away. Sheen had escaped destruction, but it was deserted and silent. We found no dead bodies here, but the night was too dark for us to see into the side roads of the place. Suddenly, my friend complained of feeling faint and thirsty, and we decided to try to find one of the houses in Sheen. The first house we broke into was a small house next to another one. We had a bit of trouble getting in through the window, but we finally made it. Unfortunately, there wasn't much food left. I found some old cheese that wasn't very good to eat, but at least there was water to drink. I did find a hatchet though, which I thought would come in handy later on. We went down the road towards Mortlake and saw a white house with a garden wall around it. We checked the pantry and found some food to eat. We found 2 loaves of bread, an uncooked steak, and half a ham. We were lucky to find this because we had to eat this food for the next 2 weeks. There were also bags of haricot beans, lettuce, bottled beer, tinned soups, salmon, and biscuits. We ate in the dark because we didn't want to attract any attention. Suddenly, we saw a blinding green light and heard a loud explosion. Everything in the kitchen lit up in green and black before disappearing. There was a loud crash and glass shattered all around us. The ceiling fell apart and we were covered in plaster. I got knocked over and hit my head on the oven handle. I was out for a while. And when I woke up, it was dark again. The curate was with me and he was bleeding from his forehead. I couldn't remember what happened for a while, but then I slowly started to recall things. I noticed a bruise on my head. The curate whispered to me, "Are you feeling better?" Finally, I replied and sat up. "Don't move," the curate cautioned me. "The floor is covered in broken dishes, and if you make a noise, they might hear us. I think they are outside." We both sat silently, barely breathing. It was so quiet that we could barely hear each other, but suddenly, some plaster or bricks fell with a rumbling sound. We heard an intermittent metallic rattle coming from outside, very close to us. "That," said the curate when it happened again. "Yes," I said. "But what is it?" "A Martian," said the curate. I listened closely again. "I don't think it was the heat ray," I said, unsure of what had caused the disturbance. I wondered if one of the giant fighting machines had accidentally bumped into our house, like I had seen one do to Shepperton Church's tower. Our situation was so strange and confusing that we didn't move for hours until the sun started to rise. We could see a little bit of light coming through a small opening in the wall behind us, but the window remained dark. We could finally see the inside of the kitchen, which was mostly destroyed. The window had been broken by dirt from the garden, which covered the table and floor. Outside, the soil was piled high against the house, and the drain pipe was ripped off. The floor was covered in broken household items, and part of the kitchen was destroyed. Despite the chaos, the kitchen's neat dresser still stood with green stains, copper and tin vessels below, and blue and white wallpaper tiles on the walls. As the sun rose higher, we saw through the hole in the wall a Martian guarding the still glowing cylinder. We quietly moved from the kitchen to the dark scullery. Suddenly, I understood what was happening. "I think the 5th shot from Mars hit our house," I whispered to the curate. "We're buried under the rubble." The curate was quiet for a moment before whispering, "God have mercy on us." I could hear him whimpering to himself. We stayed still in the scullery, barely daring to breathe. I kept my eyes fixed on the faint light coming from the kitchen door. I could see the curate's shape and his collar and cuffs in the dim light. Outside, there was a metallic hammering, violent hooting, and a hissing sound like an engine. These sounds came and went, sometimes increasing in number. After a while, there was a thudding and vibration that made everything shake, including the pantry vessels. The kitchen doorway went dark, and we crouched there in silence and shivering for many hours until we couldn't stay awake anymore. Finally, I woke up and realized that I was very hungry. I think we must have slept for most of the day before waking up. I was so hungry that I had to do something about it. I told the person with me that I was going to look for food and went to the pantry. The person didn't say anything, but as soon as I started eating, I heard them crawling towards me.